Hello and welcome to a very exciting, I say this every episode, but a very exciting edition of Diminishing Returns this week. We are covering a film that we have touched on quite briefly 5 years ago when it was up for Best Picture at the Oscars.
Yes.
Alan? Yeah.
It would have been 4 years ago. It would have been the 2017 Oscars.
For the year of 2016, you're
Yeah.
right, yeah. We are covering Arrival again, a real favourite film. I'm Sol. That voice you just heard is Alan.
Hello.
And extra special guest this week from one of my favourites, Grammar Girl's Quick and Dirty Tips for Better Writing, I think is the full title. Excellent podcast. We have Mignon Fogarty.
Thank you.
AKA Grammar Girl.
You did. You got the whole long title right. Good job.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Grammar Girl podcast. This is we had Dr. Wendy Walsh on from the Mating Matters podcast a few episodes ago, and this is a similar situation where I'm going to try and keep my gushing to a minimum.
Oh, thank you.
That's
nice to hear that. Thank you.
This is Sol's policy for getting guests. It's only people that he likes.
That's what podcasts are great for, getting to talk to people you already like.
You are something of a linguistic expert, I guess. Is that a good
gosh, well, I
description?
wouldn't necessarily...
People don't like putting the word expert on themselves, do they?
I know, I was just going to say that. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm a curious layperson. I'm not trained in linguistics, but, over the years of 15 years doing the Grammar Girl podcast, I certainly read about it a lot, and I admire linguists and follow them on social media and try to keep up with the big picture of things that are going on in linguistics. But I'm not a trained linguist, so I wouldn't want to claim the expert title.
A linguist enthusiast, then.
Exactly.
I think I fall into that category somewhat. I haven't studied it or anything, obviously, but I do like a kind of pop etymology, like just the interesting stories behind words and, how words change over time and how meanings change. I find it all very fascinating.
Yeah, it's just filled with wonderful, intriguing stories.
That is why I was very excited about the film Arrival when I was going to see it a few years back. And I think ultimately why I was disappointed by it. We'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, so we watched this, back when it came out. And I've just watched it again, like you guys have. So I've had a few years between to digest. So my thoughts have changed slightly, which I won't reveal too soon.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I mean, just to refresh our listeners' memory, I liked it, and I think I gave it a 7 out of 10 back when we covered it for the Oscars, and you weren't as impressed. I'm going to guess you gave it a 5 out of 10, something like that?
I gave it a 5, and that was built through disappointment rather than it being a poor film.
So we'll see how that's developed. But yeah, so for anyone who hasn't seen it, Arrival is... it's very similar to the film Contact. It's about a series of alien spaceships appearing one day on Earth, and it's 12 different ships that appear around the globe, and each nation sort of trying to figure out the best way to deal with it, what to do. And one of the ships obviously lands in America, and we follow their site where they send some linguistics experts and a scientist up to figure out a way to communicate, because obviously they have no reference for our earthly languages. We have no reference for their interplanetary language. So it's a really interesting premise, I think, the notion of how would you communicate with, well, an alien.
Yeah. Mignon, may I ask you, you saw this at the time, I presume.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know what you were going into, that it was a kind of languagey film?
I did. Yeah, I watched it when it came out, and then I watched it again yesterday, and I think I had a similar experience to both of you. I think I liked it a little more when I saw it the first time, but there were some things that I liked more about it, or that at least I understood more about it the second time I watched it too, so it's sort of good and bad the second time.
That's it. If we, just to jump straight into the sort of heart of this, one of the main things that kind of annoyed me about this film was it's obviously gone so deep into language and how people learn languages or teach languages or express things to someone in which you have no common ground. And I know that there's a lot of sort of science behind what they're doing. They've done their research. But it still gets shown as someone like writing their name on a board and then pointing at themselves. And personal pronouns, that's not going to be a place to start like learning a language, surely. And so that sort of thing. And I do appreciate that in a film you have to boil this stuff down to very basic elements. I think that was one of the things where I watched it first time and it kind of annoyed me. Watching it a second time, it's like, okay, fair enough. You've got to play the game. You've got to kind of work to an audience that is going to be coming from all sorts of different levels here.
Yeah.
So I think I was a bit more tolerant of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know they did consult with a linguist when they were doing the film. And an interesting aside, I believe that she's the one who wrote the symbols that are on the whiteboard in one of the scenes. She actually wrote those. And it is generally accurate in the way that you would approach communicating with an alien, that you would need to first make sure everyone understands what a question is, for example. And I thought they did a great job of coming up with a conceivably alien language that could still be understood. Like to me, it would be difficult just to come up with, okay, there's an alien language. It has to be so different that we don't understand it, but still close enough that we would be able to understand it. And I think the circles and the images and having it not correlated to sounds was a great and understandable example of what something might be.
Yeah, because it is like you cross the world and find a new land and you're trying to communicate with someone you found. At least they have a mouth. They have the same mechanics to create sounds.
Right.
There is some commonality there, and you will have some similar kind of viewpoints, like we know what a tree is. We can kind of point at a tree and go tree, or a rock or whatever. But this is totally alien. It's alien, isn't it? Obviously.
There's a big discussion, I think more in the scientific community than anything, but how to mark nuclear waste sites for future generations is a real issue, because they want to prep these dangerous areas for thousands and thousands of years to the point that it might be alien life that comes upon Earth with no humans on it anymore, or beings with no concept for our culture and society that we have now.
So even a picture of a person with throwing
that's
up.
It. You can't do a sad face, because who's to say that means sad to a person, or they might not recognize it as a face. You can't do a cross. You can't write the word no. It's a really interesting problem that people have been developing.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah, and I think this is the same thing, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's one reason that I enjoyed the movie a little bit more the first time, is there was the surprise and the wonder of seeing what the new language was. And the second time, I'm like, yeah, the circles, okay.
I must say, I love that scene where Amy Adams' character, she plays our protagonist. I love the scene where she kind of breaks down the base sentence, "What is your purpose on Earth?"
First, we need to make sure that they understand what a question is, okay? The nature of a request for information along with a response. Then we need to clarify the difference between a specific you and a collective you, because we don't want to know why Joe Alien is here. We want to know why they all landed. And purpose requires an understanding of intent. We need to find out, do they make conscious choices, or is their motivation so instinctive that they don't understand a why question at all? And biggest of all, we need to have enough vocabulary with them that we understand their answer.
I think I've spoken about it on this show before, but I'm a big fan of exposition in general. If you can find a way to just kind of deal out little bits of exposition without it feeling like contrived writing, then I'll generally really go for it. And so, I think that's a big part of why I like this film, is that it's this compelling mystery. What do these aliens want? Why are they here?
Yeah.
That does work, but there is a huge exposition dump somewhere where Jeremy Renner is just doing voiceover. That is less skilled woven into the narrative. There's so much to like about this film, and ultimately that is why I ended up giving it a low score, because I was so close to really liking it and I was let down. But yeah, let's actually kind of take the plot a little bit. So these ships, these sort of extraterrestrial vessels suddenly arrive on Earth and just park in positions across the globe. There's 12 of them. It's big news, obviously. We are following Dr. Banks, who is some sort of linguistic doctor. Do we ever get a proper sort of official, what she does?
She's lecturing when we're introduced to her, so
Yeah, she's some sort of professor.
She's got a first in Oriental languages from Oxford, so she knows this stuff.
Oh, can I just say, as a former professor, when the students say, turn the TV on, there is no way she would have been able to, like, get the audio visual working in real life. You can never get it to work in a classroom. Come on. I had to suspend my disbelief from the first scene.
I do love that scene where you know, after she turns on the TV and you just get these flashes of it's not quite chaos, but you get the sense of, oh, something big is happening. You know, there's some aeroplanes flying over and people just kind of in a bit of a panic, and it is, I think, quite a believable portrayal of what it would be like if some alien crafts appeared around the world and, you know, weren't necessarily hostile, but, you know, there'd be a very uneasy sense of, well, what's going on, what's happening.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think the film as a whole comes across as a really realistic portrayal of this sort of thing, and one of the main, certainly towards the sort of first 2/3 of the film, the main conflict is between the scientists and the army guys, who are kind of like, look, we need to know what's happening, or we're going to nuke it, and they're going, well, no, let's just try and like learn and understand things.
Yeah, that was all very believable. Yeah, and that they would just send them in the first time with almost no preparation. Yeah.
But even to the point where, you know, the military guys, or at least their direct liaison, he is trying to understand, but he's like, well, I've got to report to someone he's like the go-between, and getting that path of communication and you can understand both sides. I thought it was really nicely handled, and you know, the guy whose name I can't remember and looks like a kind of Joaquin Phoenix has had a bad day. that guy. He's really not, like, he'll just be very direct, like, look, I don't care what you're doing, because, you know, this is our position.
Yeah,
I liked all that stuff. It really worked, and I think that felt realistic as the kind of the sort of respectful conflict between these different authorities.
That's every sci-fi B movie, you know, ever made, pretty much. It's the military versus the scientists, and I could give you so many examples of that, but the fact that this film kind of finds a fresh spin on that, I think, is really remarkable, and the way it does feel very natural, and you completely do understand both sides, and I also love that it's this second layer of the film being about communication. You know, there's the superficial level of not superficial, but the main level of, you know, trying to talk to the aliens, but then there's also all this stuff about how we communicate with one another that's kind of woven in there. I really like it.
And working with the other countries and all that sort of thing. Yeah, you're right. The communication is a real thing, and sharing knowledge, which is like the whole point, really, isn't it? It's like sharing the communication of knowledge.
Yeah. So this was directed by Denis Villeneuve, who I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation of his name there, but, you know, I think he's probably best known for the Blade Runner sequel that he made after this, Blade Runner 2049. You know, a very well-established director at this point. I think it's a really well-directed film. It's just one of these films where every little element, you know, the cinematography, the music, the acting, it all coalesces, you know, comes together just in this, to create this vision, you know. It doesn't feel like there's a single thread that's out of place here when you watch it.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way to sell what's, you know, ultimately quite a simple story. Maybe not in terms of wrapping your head around, but just in terms of the plot beats.
And I think in terms of it being like, how do you sell this? It's a sci-fi film, really, but it's so slow and there's no action. It's like you really have to sell that really well. Yeah. But yeah, it is. I agree. I think as a whole package, it feels like it's a film with all its parts working towards the same goal, which, you know, you don't always get. And the sound mix is really great. Not something you'll hear me say very often. Like, if you normally you don't even notice that sort of thing, even if it's good. But the sound mix is really good. There's a lot of stuff that really puts you in the place, like when they put the earphones on or they put a hood up and it affects the sound that you're hearing. Nice stuff like that. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, Sol, actually, was he lined up as the Blade Runner director before this, or was it this that kind of got him the gig?
It was announced after this, I believe. I'm not sure if the talks were happening beforehand, but it certainly makes sense that, you know, you make a kind of thoughtful sci-fi film, relatively low budget for what it is, sci-fi film, then that kind of gets you the Blade Runner gig. But I don't know. It is the true answer there. I'm not entirely sure what the timeline is.
It's just, there is obviously a very visual similarity, and maybe they like the look of it. But so Mignon, can I ask you? So you were a university professor. Mm-hmm. Have you ever been approached by a sort of shady military figure and whisked off in a helicopter?
No, no, but I have been asked to consult on legal cases about contract language, but nothing as frightening as helicopters landing on my lawn in the middle of the night.
That is an early scene where Forrest Whitaker comes and basically asks our principal character there to help out, and it is one of those. I like that as well, because she doesn't just go, but it is a situation where you would be like, okay, aliens have just landed and I'm going to be a person to try and communicate with them. Like, you can't really let that opportunity go, can you? But
one thing that surprised me about both of those scenes was just the small number of words that were used. There wasn't a whole lot of verbal communication going on between all the characters. It felt very minimalist to me in terms of dialogue.
Yeah, which I guess goes right hand in hand with our communication, theme. And the Forrest Whitaker character, whatever his name is a very direct person. He's like, look, I need to know this. I'm telling you this now. I've got 5 seconds before I leave. And that's his style. That's why he does military as well. So like that obviously comes hand in hand with that. And it really set her up straight away as a strong character, because as much as this is like an amazing opportunity, it's also totally scary and just being thrown in your face by someone who is quite scary as well.
Right. And it establishes her as a rigorous researcher, because, she knows how to do it and she's not going to do it some half-baked way.
Yes. And if a man came up to you with a helicopter and just said, look, I need to whisk you away, would you go? Or would you look into that all?
Well, I'd make sure I had my iPhone tracking on.
They managed to use that as well as a good way to not have many people there. So it's just her and the Jeremy Renner character, who is the scientist, I believe is his title. I don't think we ever get a specific science that he works in. Because you want a team of like 2,000 linguists working on this. That's what you want.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised. That was one thought I had, is they should have many people working on this. And later in the movie, it seemed like they did in a lot of different countries. But yeah, I expected her to have a much bigger team.
Like I said, I think it just strikes that balance where, you can only have so much realism in a film, in that you've got to tell this story. Like, this would take years and years of study with thousands of people, and, you'd get a doctorate at the end of it, because you could write a really interesting doctoral thesis on it. But we need to boil this down for a film. And, they work out this completely alien language in, 2 weeks or whatever it's supposed to be. Because there's definitely a sort of time-passing montage, so not very clear how long it is.
Yeah.
But it's got to be a short enough time that the tension is continually rising.
Yeah.
Someone's going to suddenly decide to put a bomb on it and all that sort of thing.
I think that's something the film does really well, actually, is the pacing. It kind of, it's this slow boil, but you do get the sense of this ticking clock. And then obviously in the third act, it is like, okay, now, we need to move quickly. And I think it's legitimately very tense at the end, when they're kind of rushing around trying to save the world, essentially, prevent the Chinese government from just nuking the spaceship they have in their territory. Again, I suppose that goes back to the direction. I think it's just very well made. I often talk on the show about the grammar of film and film language. It's obviously not a language in the traditional sense, but I love in this film how it kind of manipulates our expectations on that front, because up front we're presented with these flashbacks, or at least they appear to be flashbacks, of Amy Adams' character with a daughter who we learn as the film goes on, is terminally ill and certainly doesn't appear to be around anymore. And so, the way it's presented, you think, right, she had a child, she went through this horrible time, and, we're picking up with where she is now. But then, the big twist of the film is that the alien language remaps your mind, which is, a real concept they're working on there, which I suppose I'll put a pin in this and come back to it. But by learning the language, which itself you kind of have to read from back to front,
like their ship or their bodies, their written language has no forward or backward direction. Imagine you wanted to write a sentence using 2 hands starting from either side. You would have to know each word you wanted to use, as well as how much space that it would occupy. Linguists call this nonlinear orthography, which raises the question, is this how they think?
You know, the big twist is that these aren't flashbacks we've been seeing throughout the film. They're kind of memories of the future that she's beginning to pick up on, because she learns this language and it rewires her brain, her way of thinking, so that she can perceive time, essentially, like all of her time as one.
It is played really nicely because, like you say, we as a film audience, we are used to a certain grammar of film, and when you see someone having a dream or a flashback it's a flashback, and then they wake up and it's like, oh well, that was obviously a traumatic period. She keeps thinking about her daughter who's died, like obviously you would be thinking about that. So we get that, we understand it, and then all of a sudden she says, "Who's that girl?" in my dreams. It's like, what? It's a beautiful piece of misdirection, cinematic misdirection, and you're waiting for it to pay off for her as a character, as in, all this sort of, she's had a bad, something bad happen in her life, and how are we going to deal with that? Is she growing as a person or whatever? And it's actually something completely different, but obviously completely keeping in theme with what we're dealing with about the non-linear concept of all this.
Right.
And to present that in a linear way is quite good, actually. Because this doesn't feel complicated really at any point.
I think this is something I really loved on the rewatch, because the first time round I was just trying to guess what was going to happen, and obviously I had no idea where it was going, but on the rewatch obviously I knew the twist, so kind of watching it play out again, it's like when you watch The Sixth Sense and you know the ending and you kind of go, oh, it's so obvious now.
Yeah, that was why I liked it more on the second watching too. I was less confused, and you can watch it unfold. But also the first time I was less familiar with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis than I was this time, and it's just so fascinating because it's a controversial theory in linguistics. So a long time ago there were people who there was an indigenous language where there was no word for time, and so the old time linguist decided that those peoples had no concept of time, that they couldn't conceive time, and that's been disproven and is very controversial, but you often hear it repeated. But more recent studies have shown that, at least in a smaller way, language does affect how your brain works, because the example you often hear is that the different languages have different words for color, and some languages have different words for blue and green, and others don't. And if people come from a language that has different colors for blue and green, they can sort colored swatches better according to, like, by color, so they can separate the blue and the green swatches better than people who don't have separate words for those two colors. So it was just fascinating for me to see how they portrayed this controversial theory, and then took it like over the top with, not only does it change how you think, but it changes how you perceive time itself.
Yeah, I don't know if actually the words you use will actually let you see the future, but
right.
I think as a kind of poetic concept, I'm perfectly happy to go with it. I think it's a really nice idea, even if it's obviously pushing the boundaries of reality. And the fact that there is that kind of basis for it, certainly in scientific theory, if not fully proven stuff. But I really love that, and what I love is that it's not just as simple as that's the twist, because obviously the daughter is, she dies very young, and it's really painful for Amy Adams and her partner, who we find out is Jeremy Renner, but she still chooses to have the child, and I think that is the kind of depth to this concept that kind of it gives it more than just being a straight up bit of sci-fi. It gives it this kind of human, emotional depth.
It's really beautiful. I mean, life is painful.
I found really powerful, to be honest, on the repeat viewing. The idea that the value of something, and it's a concept that I think of a lot. I've been kind of pushing this idea for a while myself, but the notion that the value of something is not in its longevity, but the time of it happening. So a relationship, for example, can end, but it doesn't mean that you wasted your time, because you had a great however much time with that other person and grew as people and so on. And I think as a culture, we have a tendency to view things by whether or not they last. But this film is kind of pushing away from that, I think. It's, she obviously decides that it's still worth having this child that she loves and loves her back. And even though it's very painful for her, and that's ultimately why things don't work out with Jeremy Renner, because he thinks the opposite. But I just think it's such an interesting concept there emotionally, and for those characters to kind of explore. I was very impressed on the,
yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah,
I think that's very true, and it is, if you do see time as a circle, or you see the whole picture at once, it would affect your behavior. But then I don't know, you get into all kinds of time paradox shenanigans there with like, if knowing the future will affect your choices, then how does that affect? So
there's an outright paradox in the film, if you want to really get into that, with
the Chinese general.
Yeah, she's only able to phone up the Chinese government and prevent the bombs from going off because she's had a conversation in the future that she's remembering where the general tells her what she said on the phone. And it's this thing where there's no primary unique source for any of this happening. It all relies on something else having already happened, which can't happen. And so it doesn't, if you want to really get into it on that level, it doesn't quite add up or make sense. But I like that. Again, I think it just adds to the kind of poetry of the film.
I think that's why ultimately I was frustrated with it the first time round, because it was all building up to something, and then the payoff was, I don't know if clunky is the right word, but it didn't quite hang together. And then, ultimately what our story is, all this stuff about the aliens, all the sci-fi stuff and the language, is kind of secondary to, hey, we're just telling this story about this woman's emotional kind of journey, which is okay, but, and I think that's why I appreciated it more this time around, because I kind of knew what I was expecting. But I'd been built up for an hour and a half to this kind of point of like, oh, I really want to know what's going to happen now. I'm really interested. And it kind of nothing happens. And that's sort of the point, they just they send their message and then fly away. But it was pure frustration at the time. And so watching it the second time, sort of knowing a bit more what to expect was a lot easier.
There's an implication that the aliens have come to teach us. In fact, is it an implication? Do they outright say it? The idea that the aliens have come to teach us this language because they know that in doing so, they can then rely on us in the future to do something to save them, which it comes back to this idea of a zero-sum game, which again I love that scene so much. There's a scene where one of the flash forward moments where Amy Adams' child's trying to think of the phrase for a kind of win-win compromise, and that, like, she says, what's the word I'm trying to think of, and I was racking my brain trying to think like compromise, and then she says compromise, no, and I couldn't think of it. And then the second I heard zero-sum solution, I was like, oh, that's it. And then she does the exact same thing. And I think it's rare that a film manages to take me on the same exact journey as its protagonist in that way, where I'm putting the pieces together at the exact same moment that they are, and it's almost an interactive experience on that level. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I was just really impressed all round how well it held up on a repeat viewing. I liked the film a lot when I first saw it, but I think I love it now. I've used that word love a lot. It's pure science fiction in that it's, exploring a kind of hard science kind of idea and its implications on humanity and so on. But then at the same time, it has this real human story at the core of it, and that's that's what I like a genre element to get me in the door, but then a strong emotional backbone propping it up, and that's what this film has, I think.
Sometimes I watch occasionally I'll consume a piece of content, a book or a movie, and I won't necessarily love the experience of watching it or reading it. Maybe it'll feel slow or confusing or something like that. But then I also know that it's going to stick with me for a long time. And I feel like this movie is like that. I felt like it was very slow, but I also know it's going to stick with me. I'm going to remember these themes and ideas for a long time.
Can I ask you, Mignon, if you were put in a position where you had to communicate with someone who spoke a completely different language? Let's assume it's a human. Let's not make it too difficult.
Okay.
Where would you start? What would your let's say you've just two people. You're in a tropical island. You've crashed together somewhere.
Yeah, I do think I would start with names first, to establish, a name. And then I think the easiest thing to do would be nouns and verbs. So you'd hold up a rock and say rock. You'd point to a tree and say tree. Yeah. And then, as they did in the movie, so Ian walks, and he's walking back and forth in front of the barrier. So those simple verbs that you can act out, I think would also be quite easy. How you would ever explain the idea of purpose or abstract ideas like courage or what you believe. I have no idea how you would establish those meanings. I just don't know.
In this particular case, it's do they even have a concept of walking? Do they know what that is? Like, do they have names like that? That might not be even in their kind of culture.
It did stress me out when Jeremy Renner decided that they should call the aliens, because there's two that they meet with and communicate with, and they nickname them Abbott and Costello. But later on, we see the aliens using those names in their communication with the humans, and I just thought, like, oh, that's, if these are hostile aliens who've come here and they find out that you've named them after these two bumbling idiots, that they might take that really badly. That might be what sets them over the edge and makes them wipe out Earth. It stressed me out when he decided that. It's like, no.
Well, right, and when one got injured, and she says, "I'm sorry," and how would they even understand the concept of sorry if on the desert island between two humans? You could do that, a lot of that with body language. Yeah. You're hunched over, you're frowning, but they didn't have that body language to share between them to establish concepts like sorry. Although they did have the gestures, which there are linguists who specifically studied gesture, and when they touched the barrier between them, when she put a hand up and then they put a hand up, that was definitely a moment of connection that was similar to gesture. So that was cool.
What about the actual physical manifestation of these aliens then? Always a dangerous game to play, creating an alien, and especially if you're going to show it quite clearly. Yeah.
I was initially, like, when I first saw this in the cinema, I was, as the smoke begins to clear and you begin to see the alien, I thought, oh no, they're showing it, they're ruining it. It's and then as you see it, it's like, oh wow, no, this is a really cool, unique design. And again, I think it's really to the film's strength that they do show it, because the design they've got is just so alien. It's utterly unlike anything really on this planet. It kind of looks, it's a bit like a spidery thing. It's like a hand walking around, but then
yeah, it does have a kind of skin kind of look to it. It looks like an elephant skin. Yeah. It's not completely alien, I guess. It looks like it might be carbon based.
Yeah, when you do see the shot of the entire thing a bit later on, it looks a bit like a squid almost, but if it could bend its tentacles like fingers. It's the perfect blend of, menacing but benevolent and malevolent at once. It's, because when they first introduce these things, we don't know if they're nice or nasty, good or evil. And the design is just neutral, I suppose. They could be terrifying, scary things, but then they're also kind of a bit silly. They do evoke elephants, which, I certainly think of as quite friendly animals. Whether or not that's accurate, I think it's a kind of idea a lot of us have of elephants. So yeah.
But that is an interesting concept, actually, because I was thinking when I was watching this film, like I said, in the earlier parts, the conflict is really all between the scientists versus the military kind of style. And the military are like, look, we don't know if they could be dangerous. We might have to make quick action. There's a lot of truth to that. Whenever something with greater technology suddenly turns up on the doorstep, it's bad news. Like that is certainly history bears that out.
Well, yeah, as the character says, he refers to the various indigenous people being wiped out by white people who went over and found them and met them.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously it's not quite that simple, because no matter how good your technology is, you turn up on someone's doorstep and suddenly they've got diseases you've never had before. So it does kind of work both ways sometimes. But I think yeah, ultimately, you have to see this as a threat. There's no way you can't, because even if they are the scout party that are benevolent, that doesn't mean that what's coming after them is going to be the same. These might be the explorers, the scientists, but once you've made contact, it's like, oh yeah, well, everyone can come now. So that is obviously, the problem, but at no point did I feel like these guys were a threat, these aliens were a threat. I always felt like, no, the scientists think they're cool, and therefore we're on the scientist side. And I think that's one thing that's slightly lacking in the film. I think just a little bit more potential of menace.
Yeah, that's a fair
which
point,
I think is
actually.
supposed to be there, but I just didn't, you never felt it.
Well, obviously, I just said about the design kind of working both ways, but I agree. Once they start talking and communicating in any capacity, really, you do kind of think, oh, these are nice, friendly aliens. They're Abbott and Costello. They're fun and cuddly. I was sad when Costello went through death process or whatever the line was.
But that's it. It's like, what I mean is, like, when, let's say, just like Columbus turns up on, on a Jamaica or whatever, wherever he landed, somewhere in the Caribbean, and he himself is perhaps not a major threat, but it's bringing something. But I'd be interested, Mignon, like how much is language a part of that? The kind of colonization, I guess, because obviously one of the things that gets lost in that is indigenous languages. But if language is a big part of culture, is that something that you would deliberately break if you are trying to destroy culture?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So there are horrible stories about the current people who settled the United States and did horrible things to the indigenous tribes. And one of the things they did was they took the children, and I believe they put them in schools away from their parents, and told them they couldn't speak their native languages. They really stigmatized the indigenous languages, and they were beaten if they spoke their own language, and to the point where I believe, when they went back home, they didn't speak the language. So, early American efforts really attempted to wipe out indigenous languages of the Native Americans. It's a long, horrible history that I wasn't aware of until I started doing the Grammar Girl podcast. So, there's a lot of things we just don't learn in school.
It's amazing. You keep just learning more and more about how your culture was terrible to
that's
right.
Yeah, we're British. We're used to that.
Yeah. So you saying, Alan, that you think the aliens, this was part one of a hostile takeover. They were teaching us their language so they could force us to speak
like, no one ever kind of discovers a new place and with hostility. It's just like, oh my God, look what's here. Oh, you have something that we want. You have nutmeg. We want that. I'm going to kill everyone. Because you won't let us have it.
Now that you mention it, I suppose it's interesting that there's, unless I missed it, which is very possible, there's no real mention of, are we trying to teach the aliens English? I mean, obviously they do with their whiteboard, but the effort seems very much on learning their language rather than getting them to speak one of our languages. And obviously, that's why they've come here, to teach us their language, because it unlocks a form of time travel. But it's interesting actually that they don't really grapple with trying to get the aliens to speak our way. But then I suppose they've come here in an advanced craft. They kind of hold the cards.
Yeah, but if they're more advanced, they'll be able to learn.
Well, yeah, exactly.
They'll learn better than we do.
I would have liked to see Abbott and Costello sort of trying to form words with their weird tentacle hands.
Right. Who's on first base?
Writing the ABCs in their squidding.
Yes, yeah. That would have been quite nice, actually. Yeah, just to see them write Louise or whatever it is. Like, they just copy it. They don't really know what they're writing. That'd be good.
If I can throw a question your way, now that Alan's kind of got those out of his system, Mignon. This isn't to do with the film at all, but on this podcast for a while now, we've been trying to get a phrase entered into the dictionary to kind of boost our figures. we came up with cinema unawarité, which we think's a good name for the genre of films like Borat and Bruno and Bad Trip that's just come out, where people kind of almost like prank movies that involve people who don't realise they're in a film.
So it's where people know they're being filmed, but they don't. They don't understand the true purpose.
Yeah,
and
it's being woven into
like
a narrative.
in Borat, it's not hidden camera. They're well aware they're being filmed, but they think they're teaching him to drive.
So obviously the best way to get something into the dictionary is just to kind of get it into the public lexicon, get people actually using it. Is there a way to cheat the system to just kind of get it in without doing that?
No, there's really not. Oh. Actually, it's interesting. In last week's Grammar Girl podcast, I interviewed Ralph Keyes, who wrote The Hidden History of Coined Words. Right. And perhaps maybe the most surprising thing to me was, in some ways, the harder you try, the more likely you are to fail. So most coined words were offhand, haphazard, insults, things like that. And the people who really try hard to coin a word almost never succeed. So I would say just, go with it, be natural, be authentic, use it when, but if you try to put too much effort into it, it'll probably just backfire.
That works to our strengths, actually, not putting effort in.
So this is a tiny thing, but you are much more familiar with movies and sounds than I am. One thing that jumped out at me is so much heavy breathing. Amy Adams is constantly breathing, and we can hear it. What do you think about that?
I think that comes down to very specifically within this film, where they're really trying to, like I said with the sound mix, they're trying to pull you in and you're really in the heart of it and you're feeling it. Like you're in that suit with them while they're, in the hazmat suit and all that sort of thing.
This might be complete rubbish, but I do think we're kind of primed as a species to get on edge, to tense up when we hear breathing, because it's such a, I don't know, it often goes hand in hand with,
If you can hear someone breathing, they're too close.
Exactly. So I think there's an element of that as well. It kind of helps up the tension in the film. But yeah, it's a good point, actually. It's a very, very heavy breathy film.
There was one little thing that jumped out at me, and again, this is about language, I guess, and in communication and your expectations of language, because at one point they're talking to someone else who I think is working in one of the other countries or something, and he's saying, oh yeah, we said something to them and they just played things back to us from an unknown source. And they were like, oh, what did they play? And he said, well, they just play clips of conversation from the room. But obviously it's just saying they're kind of recording what they're saying and sort of playing it back to them in an attempt to communicate. But for me, I read that as clips of conversation from The Room, as in the Tommy Wiseau masterpiece. And that would be great if aliens turned up and they just started playing clips from The Room.
What was interesting to me about that scene is it made it clear that different ships were trying different methods to communicate with the humans. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and then so we find out that the Chinese are perhaps using a game, Mahjong, to try and communicate. And then she says, you're setting that up as a language of competition. And that's really interesting. Again, that kind of how we use language affects... and how we understand language affects our behaviour and affects what we do.
Yeah, it's a classic thing of there's no Klingon word for love, I believe. If you want to get really nerdy. You're setting yourself up to fail if you're trying to get a peaceful outcome there.
One more thing as well, just obviously we've talked about the actors a lot, but we haven't quite said, really excellent performances all around.
Yeah. There was a lot of people complaining at the time that Amy Adams didn't get Oscar nominated while the film did, and I remember kind of poo-pooing that at the time, just because I thought she gave a stronger performance in Nocturnal Animals, which also came out the same year, which was almost entirely snubbed at the Oscars. But yeah, I mean, that aside, she gives a really nice kind of nuanced performance here, and Jeremy Renner is good, which isn't something I usually say.
I wonder if you have a crack at this, Sol. Amy Adams has actually been Oscar nominated 6 times.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is not one of them, but can you throw some names at me? Can you name the films?
Well, are there any trick ones in there, like singing a song in Enchanted?
No, they're all actors.
Okay.
No. Okay. She hasn't produced a short film or anything like that.
Okay. There was The Fighter, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Was it called Doubt? That film about the Catholic
that's
Church?
one, yeah.
Was she nominated for American Hustle? I haven't seen it. But
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You're going well.
Yeah, I think that's the extent of my knowledge there, though.
So she got one for Vice.
Oh yes, of course.
And
Yeah.
Another for The Master,
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
which I don't think I've seen that. And then her first one, which I think was her breakthrough role, Junebug.
Oh, of course. Yes, I should have got that one.
But yes, they're all the American Hustle is a leading role, the other a supporting role.
Yeah.
But here's another thing: Jeremy Renner has been Oscar nominated twice, which really kind of dilutes the the quality of the award, if you ask me.
Well, he was the Hurt Locker, right? The Hurt Locker.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And then the following year for The Town.
Oh, The Town. I always forget he's in that. Yeah.
But yeah, great performances. I think Amy Adams is marvelous in this. Yeah, definitely. And like I said, sort of Forrest Whitaker just hits the perfect note with that character, and all the supporting roles are just nice and neat. I really like that.
Yeah, as I said, when we covered this last time, I gave it a 7 and you gave it a 5, Alan. But are you sticking with that 5, Alan, or are you?
No, I have significantly pushed it up to a 7.
Oh, that is significant.
And I still think that the film as a whole is kind of better than that. I think it's just a beautiful piece of filmmaking. But ultimately, the story it still sort of peters out to the end for me, and or that kind of reveal, I don't know, it just doesn't pay off for all the build-up still, even on a second watch. But yeah, it certainly annoyed me a lot less, which is nice.
Well, I've definitely come to appreciate it a bit more than I already did, so I'm upping my 7 to an 8. So Mignon, yeah, what would you give it out of 10?
Yeah, I think I'd give it a 7 for the reasons that we talked about, that I didn't particularly love watching it. I speeded it up to 1.25. I felt like it was going so slowly. but I know that I will think about the ideas and themes in it probably for the rest of my life. So yes, maybe an 8 because of that. 8 for the movie, 6 for the experience of watching it.
I do love that speed up feature. I remember when they started rolling it out on certain streaming services, there was all this backlash in the film community and petitions and people saying, no, watch a film as the filmmaker intended, and those people don't appreciate how handy it is when you have to rewatch something for a podcast that you're not necessarily that into to be able to kind of just refresh your memory at 1.5. Wow, okay, yes, that's a real real upgrade in our score for this film. That's impressive. It's the stuff that you come back to and appreciate more on the repeat viewing. I think that tends to be really well made stuff. So, well, all right, I have one more language question.
Okay.
Because our show it used to be a weekly show. We recently switched to it being fortnightly. I have to keep resisting the urge to say bi-weekly when saying this.
Don't do it.
Because
that mean twice
why
a
does
week?
bi-weekly mean 2 things? It's a
Nobody
nightmare.
knows what it means. Yeah. No, I've done a piece on this. So if you look up the dictionary definition, like they both mean 2 different things. Like nobody knows what they really mean. You can make arguments about maybe what they are supposed to mean based on their etymology, but people don't know. So my advice is generally don't use those words if you want to be understood. They aren't clear, so people don't know. And actually, Americans aren't going to know what fortnightly means, but most of us. But it's
really?
probably it's a better choice than bi-weekly or what I tell Americans is just say what you mean every 2 weeks. That you're going to be much more widely understood if you say it that way.
Okay.
If clarity is your goal, every 2 weeks is what you want to say.
I'll make that switch for our international listeners then.
Do Americans not really use the word fortnight? I don't think I was aware of that.
No, I didn't know that. I'm quite good with the language differences between us, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, we've heard it, but I bet only 10% of Americans could tell you what it actually means.
Wow. Is this like how autumn will turn up on like a fancy wedding invitation, but it's fall if it's just in like general speech?
Americans definitely know what autumn means. We know autumn and fall are synonyms. It's used more widely here than fortnightly for sure. Yeah. I don't know why. It's a very handy word. We should use it.
Yeah, I learned that back as a kid because there was a comic book I used to get which came out fortnightly, and I think that's how I learned that word.
I wonder if now younger people, I don't know, I've never played Fortnite, the game, but I don't know if it's defined in the game, if it has a meaning, or if that's just the name and it's unconnected to any meaning, but maybe younger people are more likely to know what it means now. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I hadn't even considered it, but now that you've said that, I've just realised that Fortnite's a pun because it's about building forts, but maybe there's a kind of... Yeah, maybe there's a sort of, every 2 week pattern in the game as well that I'm not aware of or something. That's film here. Anything else, Alan? Or
I mean, I have loads of language questions I could ask.
well, maybe give us one to rattle off. But before then, Mignon, is there anything you'd like to plug while you're here?
Oh, no, just check out the Grammar Girl podcast. I do a weekly show, so I don't have to deal with fortnightly or biweekly. So, and I'm on Twitter and Facebook and TikTok. I just started TikTok as the real Grammar Girl. And I think that I'm actually going to ask on Twitter if people who play Fortnite, if there's any meaning associated with the time frame. I'm going to ask and see what people say. So,
wow.
If you listen to this in the future, you can go find that tweet and see what people said.
Amazing. Yeah, I will recommend your podcast as well to our listeners. There's a lot of film specific stuff that comes up in there. I remember when I started listening, there was an episode that you did about whether or not Yoda's cadence from Star Wars was a legitimate dialect or not, I think. I can't quite remember, but I found it very interesting.
I love that. It's one of my favorite episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. All right, so yeah, thanks so much, Mignon, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My pleasure, yes.
And before I tell our listeners to come back in 2 weeks' time, Alan, do you have one more very quick language question to ask?
Okay, so all right, how do you feel about the most recent development in language that I'm noticing that's annoying me? Is people using of instead of have in like saying, "Oh, I would have done this."
Yes.
Does that annoy you as much as it annoys me?
I'm pretty chill about language after all these years. I wouldn't say it annoys me, but it is something that can make you look bad in your writing. And it's something that people do bring up a lot, that, they get really upset when they see people write should of instead of should have, the contraction on social media or in work stuff. So, but those are contractions of should have, could have.
It sounds like it makes sense as long as you don't think about what the words mean at all.
I don't think you can probably blame text-to-speech anymore for those errors. Maybe that happens sometimes. But yeah, no, it's a common error, and it's something I hear about a lot.
I've always been a little bit, kind of my nature is to be annoyed by it. But, I am very, I understand enough about language to go, okay, every word I speak is corrupted from something else previously that, 200 years ago was totally different or whatever.
And culture is such an influence. I remember a couple of years ago, I did some research on what the order was. If you say shoulda, coulda, woulda, shoulda, and I looked at what the order was, what order was most common, and I don't remember what the answer actually was, but I remember it was most common order was because there was a pop song that used that order. So, and then that was what people ended up saying. So culture, absolutely influences language in a lot of different ways.
I always try and check myself when I get annoyed with this stuff, just because I remember reading about a writer from the 20s, I think it was H.P. Lovecraft, but they were complaining about use of the word like instead of as. So, he wasn't even complaining about the teenage, thing of saying like every other word. He was complaining about saying that looks like this instead of, that looks as this would, or, he felt that was too much of a corruption of proper language. Right. And obviously it's so commonplace
when
nowadays.
You start looking at what when you start looking at what annoyed people 100 or 200 years ago, you instantly let go of all your current annoyances because they all sound so ridiculous. My favorite example is it used to be wrong to call curtains drapes. That was considered just horrible. So, now who would even know? So, yeah, once you start doing that, you're like, okay, we're all ridiculous.
But nevertheless, if you write of instead of have, I will judge you.
I will judge it
Yes.
in a professional email, and I checked my emails that I sent to you, Mignon, to invite you on this show about 10 times over. I was like, I can't make any errors here. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, Mignon, for joining us.
Thank you. This was great fun. My pleasure.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Come back in 2 weeks' time for our next episode, which is TBC, I believe. Is it, Alan? I don't think we've decided what it is next week.
Oh, that one again. We're doing that again.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.